All right, what is up? Welcome to the Daily Faded, yo. I'm Hetz. This is where we get faded daily and talk about the news and politics of the day. So please join me. Have a toke, have a drink, whatever it is you like in the evening. Get faded with me, and let's talk about the news. Today is September 20. Today is September 24. Today is September 24th, 2020. This is TDF 101, the end of democracy. Before we get to the end of democracy, let's check in on the COVID numbers. Only problem is that sometimes if I refresh this too late, it doesn't have all of the numbers that I like to look at. But here we are, we have the totals. So total cases worldwide is over 32 million now. Ignore the changes today category, the column there, because it's not right. This, I don't know, it's like an East Coast feed and it resets early or something like that. I'm not sure why it does this. In the United States, we're up to 7.1 million confirmed cases and 207,538 deaths. And of course, we also always check in on California. And California has reached 800,000 confirmed cases, so that's a terrible landmark to hit. And we have 15,402 deaths as of today in California. 12 million people have lost healthcare during the COVID crisis. 12 million people have lost their insurance. And yesterday, Trump was asked about the FDA discussing tougher standards for a vaccine that they were interested in exploring. And when Trump was asked it, he said, that has to be approved by the White House. So the testing standards that are used by the FDA have to be approved by the White House. He said, we may or may not approve it. That sounds like a political move. Why would they be adding great length to the process? So once again, someone tries to do something based on science. Donald Trump claims that it is politics and that it's the deep state at the FDA trying to get Trump, is basically what he's saying. And I think that when the situation is like this, when the FDA and the CDC have been so thoroughly discredited, then something like this becomes responsible. From CBS News, Cuomo announces New York State will have a health committee to do its own review of the COVID-19 vaccine after the federal government says it's ready. I want to make sure we know it's safe to take, said Cuomo. That's not anti-vaxxing. That's responsible leadership, because the FDA and the CDC have been totally sullied by the Trump administration. So it's completely reasonable and, in fact, good policy for Andrew Cuomo to do that. I'm just going to throw this out there because it was entertaining. Chuck Schumer was speaking in public, and he was taunted by the crowd with taunts of, you ain't doing shit and Jesus saves. He thanked the hecklers just like he thanks Republicans. It was kind of sad. He was like, thank you. I don't know what else you should do, since you can't be a stand-up comic and start making fun or anything. Not that Chuck Schumer would have the jokes to do that. So I didn't talk about Trump last night because after talking about Breonna Taylor, I couldn't bring myself. I couldn't transition from Breonna Taylor to Trump. I just couldn't do it. And so what I didn't talk about was him saying we're going to have to see what happens when asked if he would commit to a peaceful transfer of power. He said, "We'll get rid of the ballots, and then there won't be a transition. It'll be a continuation." And for the sitting president to not say that we're going to have a peaceful transfer of power, this is unprecedented in American history. This has gotten a lot of ink and a lot of airtime as a result, and deservedly so. It was on my list at the top of my things to talk about yesterday for Trump. And, I mean, it's completely outrageous. Obviously, this country is based on the peaceful transition of power from one government to the next. A few Republicans made weak sauce replies, Marco Rubio, Mitt Romney, about the peaceful transition of power being essential, but no rebuke of Trump, nowhere near criticizing Trump. Don't come anywhere close to it. Plus, on top of that, Republicans are now starting to talk about using state legislatures to have them throw out the vote and assign the electors through the legislature, which of course a state legislature can do. If that ain't, I mean, that's as shockingly anti-democratic as what Trump said. It's so, these people are, they're so loathsome. They're so loathsome. Oh God. I literally, as I was getting ready to do this live stream tonight, I was just like, man, I don't know if I can sit there and talk about these people for a half an hour. Trump is openly saying, and lots of conservatives are repeating this, that they want 9 justices on the Supreme Court in case they need their side to be able to throw out lots of votes, basically. Trump wants his new SCOTUS nominee confirmed so that he can steal the election. And the other thing yesterday, everyone was laughing about Melania calling Trump sir and Trump calling Melania first lady. But I actually kind of think that's not really a laughing matter, because if you listen to it, if you just take a step back and you listen to what he's saying, it's so authoritarian and patriarchal, and it's just yet another revealer, is that a word? Of how much we can revile this person. Oh man. And then there was this. Caitlin Collins from CNN tweeted, asked how an executive order protecting pre-existing conditions could have the same legal authority that a law does. HHS Secretary Azar says Trump's executive order is, quote, making a clear, defined statement of U.S. policy that people with pre-existing conditions are protected. So what's crucial about this here, making a clear, defined statement of U.S. policy. What he's saying is that Trump can write laws into existence. This is literally ruling by decree. And this is the exact thing that they constantly accused Barack Obama of. They constantly accused him of that whenever he signed executive orders. It was always the end of the world. It was always just a terrible autocratic controversy whenever Obama did it. And that's what brings us to this, which you have to check out because it's amazing. This is Trump at Ruth Bader Ginsburg's casket outside the Supreme Court. He just stands there and takes it. That is the president facing his own people. Yeah, so that's Donald Trump being booed by the people of the United States of America. Look, I'm happy that that happened because anything that takes Trump down a peg is a good thing. And I think anything that humiliates him to his face at this point is a good thing because he deserves it for everything that he's done. Let's not forget that this administration committed human rights abuses, crimes against humanity at the border. They separated children from their family. All the terrible things about Donald Trump, I don't hear people talking about that anymore. Let's remember they committed human rights abuses. And it's really, I don't know. I'm running out of words with Donald Trump. I'm reaching a point where I don't know what to say anymore. So I want to show you a little bit of Bernie Sanders' speech today, which I found quite inspiring. I've got 3 clips here to show you. He started out by mentioning his signature issues: Medicare for all, a Green New Deal, inequality. But then he said he's not going to talk about these things today because he's here to talk about the threat to democracy that we're currently dealing with. He outlined how peaceful transition of power has happened over and over again in our history, obviously going all the way back to George Washington, and how we had managed to have a vote and a peaceful transition of power in the Great Depression, in the Civil War, in World War I and World War II. And then he does an absolutely remarkable quote. Check this out.
Today, that peaceful transition of power, the bedrock of American democracy, is being threatened like never before. I am not in the habit of quoting former President Ronald Reagan, but I think something that he said in his first inaugural address makes the point about how important, how precious is this part of our heritage. And I quote Ronald Reagan: "The orderly transfer of authority, as called for in the Constitution, routinely takes place as it has for almost 2 centuries, and few of us stop to think how unique we really are. In the eyes of many in the world, this every 4-year ceremony we accept as normal is nothing less than a miracle." End of quote.
So, there he is bringing it in. And, normally I get kind of bent out of shape when people quote Reagan because he's the most overrated president in recent American history. Although, I don't know, but people who like Trump, he's pretty fucking overrated. And, and now George W. Bush is somehow overrated again. I don't even know how. So Bernie goes on to lay out all of the quotes of all the times Trump has basically said it will be rigged and that he can only lose if it's rigged. All of that. Heads I win, tails you lose, Bernie describes it as. He laid out all the evidence that there's no voter fraud, including referencing several studies that have shown that there's little to no voter fraud in the United States, including a Heritage Foundation study that showed something like less than a 10% is the amount of voter fraud in our voting. He even had the Republican attorney whose last name is Ginsburg, interestingly enough, that he referenced. And I've seen that guy speak on MSNBC because they love their Republicans on MSNBC. So, and then he also talked about the lunacy of undermining mail-in voting in the middle of a pandemic, which obviously is also not a particularly good idea. So, and then he had this to say.
Trump has also urged his supporters to become, quote, poll watchers. But what he is really saying is that he wants his supporters, some of whom are members of armed militias, to intimidate voters. And we're already seeing this in Virginia, where early voters were confronted by Trump supporters, and election officials in Fairfax County said that some voters and polling staff felt intimidated.
We must overcome voter intimidation, Bernie would go on to say. Make sure every vote is counted, and the election is not over until all of the votes are counted. Said Republicans in Congress must stop saying how much they love democracy. I thought this was a good point. Unless they're willing to speak out now and fight for democracy and fight for the vote, which of course they're not. Bernie made all the familiar points about how common mail-in voting is and has been since the Civil War, and how there's never been any fraud associated with it. He even mentioned Dan Coates' editorial, was in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. I think it was in the New York Times, where former DNI Dan Coates, who worked for Trump and is a conservative from Indiana, good friends with Mike Pence. He's a big character in the Woodward book. He's very interesting. And he seems to be a genuinely pious man. How you could work for Trump when you're pious, I don't know. Or how pious you could be if you're working for Trump, I don't know. But Dan Coates wrote an editorial that Bernie Sanders referenced where he talked about having a bipartisan special committee in the Congress to investigate the different voting techniques and voting rules and how different states around the country are doing their voting and how they're securing the vote, how they're making sure all the votes get counted, to reassure the public and to publicly show that, yes, it is going to be okay. Which, of course, is a great idea. And then he lays out what he thinks we need to do to secure our election and the peaceful transition of power. Let me see if I can get the right spot on this. Okay.
And yes, even violence. Lastly, and most importantly, the American people, no matter what their political view, must make it clear that American democracy will not be destroyed. Our country, from its inception and through the sacrifices of millions, has been a model to the world with regard to representative government. In 1863, in the midst of the terrible Civil War, Abraham Lincoln at Gettysburg stated that this government, quote, of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. That was true then. That is true today. Regardless of what Donald Trump wants, the American people will preserve democracy in our country. Thank you all very much.
I think that's what leadership looks and sounds like in this moment that we're in, this moment where we feel like we're on the edge of something, someplace that we've never been before as a nation. So that's it. That's what the real leadership looks like, in my humble opinion. And there's something else. David Dole, the Rational National, mentioned this today. I think he did a live stream. Yeah, he did a live stream. And he pointed something out that is extremely important for people who support Bernie to take into consideration. If Biden wins, Bernie will be the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee. That is massive and should be reason alone for every Bernie supporter to vote for Biden. That means Bernie will be able to directly combat the misguided notion of PAYGO, beloved by Nancy Pelosi. Yes. Bernie would be the chair of the Senate Budget Committee, and that would be a big deal. And there's very few places in our federal government where you would be better placed to combat austerity and tax cuts, which is all either party really cares about. All right, so I have a story I wanted to read. This is from CBS 4 in Minnesota. Suspicious fire destroys Trump supporters' garage, truck, pro-Biden Black Lives Matter graffiti left at scene. Minneapolis, WCCO. A Brooklyn Center family says their garage and trucks were burned early Wednesday morning, and they believe it was because of the Trump 2020 flags that were draped over them. The FBI and ATF. How the fuck do I get rid of this? There's this crazy screen in the middle here, and I can't. This was not here earlier. Anyway, look, here's what happened. They burned their shit, and they did graffiti that said Biden 2020 and had an anarchist sign and Black Lives Matter. Can I just tell you, there is not an anarchist in the world who would paint Biden 2020 anywhere. Anywhere. Anarchists don't believe in anyone having power over them, over you. And the last thing they want to do, a real anarchist, the last thing they want to do is get Joe Biden elected. So there's no way in hell that they would have done that. I don't know who burned these people's shit, but I suspect these people are the ones who spray painted this crap on their garage, because it's just ridiculous. And it literally doesn't make any sense. So we're moving on very quickly to the next story, which I think is our last story tonight. This was from NPR. Cost of racism. U.S. economy lost $16 trillion because of discrimination, bank says. New York Stock Exchange. Nationwide protests have cast a spotlight on racism and inequality in the United States. Now a major bank has put a price tag on how much the economy has lost as a result of discrimination against African Americans, $16 trillion. Since 2000, U.S. gross domestic product lost that much as a result of discriminatory practices in a range of areas, including in education and access to business loans, according to a new study by Citigroup. It's not an insignificant number. By comparison, U.S. GDP totaled $19.5 trillion last year. And not acting to reverse discriminatory practices will continue to exact a cost. Citigroup estimates the economy would see a $5 trillion boost over the next 5 years if the U.S. were to tackle key areas of discrimination against African Americans. We believe that we have a responsibility to address current events and to frame them with an economic lens in order to highlight the real costs of long-standing discrimination against minority groups, especially against Black people and particularly in the U.S., wrote Raymond J. McGuire, a vice chairman at the bank and the chairman of its banking, capital markets, and advisory teams. Wall Street itself has also faced accusations for years of discriminatory practices against African Americans, such as limiting approval for mortgages or not providing enough banking options in minority neighborhoods, which are among the damaging actions identified by Citigroup researchers. So, what is this report? What are they talking about? It's very simple. It's CYA corporate ID poll bullshit. Now, is it true that discriminatory policies cost $16 trillion? Who knows? I don't know. It sounds perfectly reasonable. I wouldn't be surprised if it was more than that. It's absolutely real. But you're talking to Citigroup. You're talking to the people who advance the cause of white supremacy and have been advancing the cause of white supremacy for decades and in some cases more than a century. The status quo is what Citigroup is interested in. Profits continuing to go up is what Citigroup is interested in. So they want to protect their ass. They want to make themselves seem woke. So they do this study and they put it out there and they go, oh, look at how much money was taken away from African Americans over the last 20 years. And it was, and something needs to be done about it. But where are the Citigroup lobbyists going to the Republican Party and telling them that we need reparations? I don't hear about that happening. I don't hear about that happening. You know, I don't hear about a federal jobs guarantee that would guarantee everybody a job with a living wage. I don't hear about Medicare for all. I don't hear about criminal justice reform. When you do hear about criminal justice reform, it's from Trump. And even criminal justice reform, we're not hearing about that from the banks. Even Joe Biden doesn't talk about it enough. Nobody talks about it enough. But that was a stone digression. I'm going to go out on a hard note tonight. You can't hear this, and there's a reason. Watch it again from the beginning and see what this cop does in Seattle. He rides right over that man's head. How horrifying is that? I'll let it play through one more time. He full on rides right over his head. Oh, it's sickening. It's really, really sickening. That's the reality of what people are facing and dealing with when it comes to the police state in this country. You could be lying in the ground and they will ride a bicycle over your head. That's what they think is okay. So we got to keep the fight up, folks. We got to keep fighting the police state. We got to keep fighting the Republican Party. We got to keep fighting the Democratic Party. We got to keep hope alive, basically, is what it comes down to. So thank you all so much. Peace out. Today is Thursday. I will be back on Monday. Have a great weekend.